The benefits that we just talked about are all the major benefits, but there are some additional ones that you should also be aware of. We've already talked about the ACA when we talked about employment law and compensation law a couple of weeks ago. But we also have ERISA, which is the Employee Retirement Income Security Act, which established minimum standards for organizations to ensure that they have appropriate health care as well as pension plans. And requiring minimum expectations of fiduciary duties to manage the funds, to make sure the PBGC, the Pension Benefit Guarantee Corporation, um, was set up to make sure that the pension systems for individuals was protected very similar to the FDIC, which protects our deposits, and the PBGC protects our pension funds in case there are problems with mismanagement and things like that. ERISA is a very complex law. There's lots of moving parts to it. I won't even begin to try to touch it, but you should be aware that each employer has to comply with ERISA. I used to work for a company when I worked in New York City. I was a temp for Shearson Lehman Brothers, which is now Shearson Brothers or something along that line. I don't know what they're called these days. But they had an entire department of like 5 or 6 attorneys that were just dedicated to doing ERISA. So interesting how that works. It's very complex. COBRA is also the law. It's called the Consolidated Omnibus Budget Reconciliation Act. It protects health care coverage for a certain period of time. So when, I believe I also talked about this in our previous lecture, but COBRA basically protects you. If you lose your job, you still have the right to purchase insurance from the organization at the group rate, which is still expensive, but it's still cheaper than buying it out on your own, particularly with all of the marketplace benefits and discounts going away, which is the thing that people are fighting for right now. Lastly is HIPAA, which adds protection to employee health care so that we keep people's healthcare information private, and it removed the constraints on pre-existing conditions to get health care. So pre-existing conditions no longer restrained an individual from being able to secure health care to cover their medical bills. Benefits, by and large, are designed to attract, motivate, and retain talent. Now, I will tell you that it has a better impact on attraction and retention than it does on motivation. It can motivate people to some extent, and it really depends on the benefit that you're getting. But by and large, good benefits packages will attract good candidates for the job, and it will often keep people secured to the company if they know they're getting good benefits from the company. There is a substantial financial cost. There's no doubt about it. Though even the minimum required benefits that are legally required have a cost, but the voluntary ones can be even more so. And so we'll talk about some common benefits, including healthcare, retirement, life insurance, and work-life balance programs, and things like that. So there are a number of different types of medical plans, and companies can choose whichever one they want, including self-funded. Not many companies do self-funded, but there are plenty that do. They set aside a lump sum of money, and when an employee has a claim, that money that has been set aside, that they normally would set aside for insurance premiums, now it gets set aside into a pool, and then the employees can access that to pay their medical bills. If you know that you've got a healthy workforce and a young and healthy workforce, then that could be an important financial benefit for the organization to not have to pay higher premiums for regular insurance. Often, though, it's not financially feasible to do a self-managed fund. in that case. But let's talk about the different kinds of plans. You can have what we call as a traditional plan. It's like Blue Cross Blue Shield. The insurance has a deductible, and then you get a proportion of your medical bills paid, and then after a certain amount of money, it's paid 100%. So you might have a $500 deductible. Then you might have 80-20. You pay 20%. The insurance pays 80 for another $15,000 in bills, and anything above $15,000 is 100% paid. So if you have a chronic illness, that is somewhat helpful, because at least once you hit that $15,000 mark, it doesn't come out of pocket anymore. It's covered entirely by the insurance. All right. So a traditional plan means people can choose the provider that is within the mix of offerings that the company has, they contract with, and they manage the funds that way. Then you have what we call a managed care plan, which is an HMO or a PPO, and you've probably heard this referred to. Most insurance plans are more like managed care than anything else, and HMOs and PPOs have in-network and out-of-network, and then there's just a nominal fee that you pay to go to your doctor, your specialist, things like that. And if it's preventative care, it's typically paid 100%. If it's not preventative and it's optional, then there's still a deductible, but the insurance system pays the rest of that. There's no 80-20 split or anything like that. You just pay your deductible, and whatever that might be, it goes up, obviously, for higher levels for specialists. And the goal here is that you negotiate good rates with people who are in network versus out of network. And then if they're out of network, then that traditional plan kind of kicks in, that 80-20 plan, where they'll pay 80% of the bill, but not the full 100% of it. But if they're in network, they will pay the 100% of that bill because they have negotiated that agreement. There are other types of options. There's medical spending accounts and health savings accounts. A medical spending account is money taken out pre-tax that can go and pay for co-pays for your doctors and medicine and things like that, eyeglasses, and you name it, anything health related. If you are, and I will also add, like if your doctor tells you that regular massage is beneficial for your back or your body because you have an injury, then if you have that doctor's letter, often the medical spending account will pay for those massages. You can also have a general health savings account where you put it in a fund and then the money comes back out. And it's usually a little bit different than a medical spending account, which is capped at what you can do. There is no cap on the health savings plans. Then we can also do dental and vision. Why they're not included in your regular health care, I don't know, but they're not. So eyes are typically separate and teeth are typically separate, and you have to have separate plans based on that. And not a lot of companies necessarily do vision plans, but most will do medical and dental at some level or another. Your manager's toolbox in the textbook talks about terminology and concepts, and there's a lot of different terms out there. For example, cost sharing, and that means that the employer and the employee both share the cost for healthcare. I work for the state of Illinois. The state pays for part of it, and I pay for part of it. Then there's the premium is the cost for the insurance. Overall, what the premium is the cost for monthly or annually for your medical benefits. A deductible is the minimum that you have to pay out of pocket before the insurance kicks in. Coinsurance means you have two different insurances, and someone may have Medicare as well as a regular insurance from their employer. Once they hit 65, they're eligible for Medicare, so they would have Medicare as one insurance, and then the coinsurance would be whatever the state or whatever your employee whatever the employer's insurance would be. A copayment is like the amount that you pay to go to see your doctor. So when I go to my primary care physician, which is the doctor that takes care of my general health needs, like a family medicine doctor or a general practitioner, they're my primary doctor. I go to them anytime I have a problem, and I would pay $25 every single time I go to the doctor. That's it. As long as they're in network, that's what the payment would be. The maximum out-of-pocket expense would be, there's a maximum that each plan has that you would pay up to a certain amount, and then after that, it's all paid for by the insurance. That you do not have to pay any more for that plan year out of your own pocket. A maximum plan limit is the maximum that the insurance will pay, period. And then if your bills exceed that, they won't pay it. Your primary care physician is the person that is the primary responsibility, that is your primary doctor to handle all of your basic medical health issues. They do your physicals and things like that. And then a specialist is somebody who does a very narrow specialization in a particular field. So let's say you need to go to a gastroenterologist because you need a colonoscopy. That's a specialist, and they have a different rate of pay. If you have to go to an orthodontist, that's a different rate of pay. If you have to go to a orthopedic surgeon, a different rate of pay. And now they still have copays, but those copays are a little higher. And so that's what a specialist is. Let's talk about some other voluntary benefits. Disability insurance. Now, there's Social Security disability, right? Somebody is limited in their ability to work. They can get Social Security benefits that cover their costs for them if they cannot work regularly. But there are additional policies that an employer can purchase that offers short-term and long-term disability insurance. Short-term disability is an income protection for employees who are only temporarily unable to work because of an illness, an injury, or something along that line. Long-term disability is, kicks in after the expiration of the short term. The short term has a certain time limit. That's determined, again, based on the illness or the injury or what have you. And if things go longer than expected, the long-term disability kicks in. And because the argument is, they really aren't going to be able to work for an extended period of time long-term. Retirement benefits also are important, and companies have different kinds of benefits. They may have a defined benefit, meaning if you work X, you'll know you'll get X amount of dollars when you retire. And then there's defined contribution, which means I will designate how much money I'll put in, but there's no guarantee what I'm going to get out. It may increase depending on how it's invested. But the expectation is at least you'll put in the minimum amount of money, and then a certain amount of money will come out afterwards. So defined benefit means you're guaranteed something at the end, a certain amount at the end. Defined contribution means you'll get something, but there's no guarantee what it will be because we don't know, we can't predict how the investments will be managed and then what amount you'll then eventually earn. So the only thing that we can control is how much we put into the system, the defined contribution. ERISA, as I told you, set the minimum standards for those, not just insurance systems, but also for pension systems. And I already told you about the PBGC that protects pension benefits, similar to the FDIC that protects our deposits in banks up to $10,000, I think it was, or maybe it's up to 15 now, I don't remember. Going into a little bit more depth, in a defined benefit plan, there is a pre-established payout, which means there is a guarantee what you will get. It can come periodically, or it can come in a lump sum, depending on what the plan's requirements are. And you can do what we call a cash balance plan. It's a guaranteed account in where the participants are provided with an account that is credited annually with a compensation credit and interest. So it just automatically goes into that cash balance account, and then you can access that money that way. But the defined benefit, there are fewer and fewer defined benefit plans, basically where you know exactly what you're going to get when you retire. The state of Illinois has some plans that are like that. Mine is not. Mine is a defined contribution. And we can choose. I made the choice to do defined contribution because I wanted to control where my investments went. In a defined contribution, as I said, the contributions all go into a fund. For example, in the state of Illinois, our funds go to a company called Voya. It used to go to TIAA-CREF. And so what happens is the employer and the employee can deposit money into that account, and it is tax deferred. So you pay the tax once you retire, not before, so that it's taxable at a later date. The range of defined contribution plans that you could expect to see or you'll hear about are a 401k. Again, they're just different types of defined contribution. The 401k makes contributions into my individual account as deferred income. The 403b is very similar, but it is reserved for schools, universities, religious organizations, certain tax-exempt nonprofits and charities and things like that. They're basically the same thing, but the 401k comes from for-profit businesses and the 403b is for nonprofits. Profit sharing programs are that pay for performance that we've already talked about in a previous lecture, that also can serve as a retirement plan. Not always, but it can. So the company might put certain part of your profit sharing into a retirement account for you. An ESOP, an employee stock ownership plan, also is a form of a deferred income, but you can get those benefits only after your vesting period and perhaps in some situations until you retire or leave the company. A money purchase plan is where an employer contributes a specific amount to each planned account. So I will tell you I want money to go here and money to go there and money to go there. I used to have it in a couple of different funds. Now I have everything centralized in one fund. But I could pick and choose the funds that I used before, and depending on what kind of risks I wanted, my investments and things like that. IRAs, or individual retirement plans, can be employer sponsored, but not all can. You can buy an IRA all on your own, but typically individual retirement plans are managed by someone who is self-employed or chooses to just invest the money on their own. You can buy one at any broker. There are traditional IRAs and Roth IRAs. Both of them have different advantages and disadvantages. Roth IRAs, you can only contribute to them up to a certain age, and they are post-tax. So you take your tax out, then you deposit to the IRA, whereas traditionals are pre-tax.